Hi, I'm Ollie Moore, Senior Policy Officer for Sustrans here in London. We recently organised a discussion on the street here, this street, to talk about how to increase cycling in London and how to make it for everyone. We often hear the phrase, build it and they will come, when we talk about cycling in London. And we wanted to investigate what other measures are needed in addition to the cycling infrastructure to make cycling for everyone that wants to in London. We hope you enjoy the video. We think it's a must-watch for everyone.
Hello and welcome to Street Talks. I'm Ruth Chyatt and I'm Head of Behaviour Change and Healthy Streets at Sustrans in London. And we're going to be talking about behaviour change today. So I've got three people here today who are going to be talking to us about this topic. An excellent panel. I'll just introduce them. We've got Isabel Clement here, who's the Director of Wheels for Wellbeing and promoting cycling to people who don't see it as being for them all over South London. And an excellent service that you're running at Herne Hill Velodrome as well. With we've done actually lots of training with you for our officers, which has been excellent. Then we've got Temi Latif, and he is the founder of an organisation called My Choice, which is about empowering young people. And you've also got a Black Riders Association, and I believe you've cycled to Africa and visited almost every country in Africa on your bike, which is very impressive. And then we also have here Ian Walker, and Ian is a Professor of Environmental Psychology at the University of Surrey. And your research focuses on kind of unconscious things that affect our decision making and our behaviours, which is also really interesting. And I know you've done some research on how people's riding position affects how drivers act around them, which is really interesting, and also what drives people to, say, buy cars or the amount of energy that they use in their homes, which is really interesting. So thanks for coming today. So the topic today is build it and who will come. And you know, we know that building excellent infrastructure makes a really big difference and can empower people to travel differently and make people feel much more comfortable to ride a bike. But it doesn't necessarily have the same impact for everybody. So that's what we want to focus on today. I know from personal experience, having been, you know, a really active cyclist since my 20s, and found it a really empowering thing for myself to get around. Just things like having children. When I had my children, you know, that changed my relationship to cycling, and suddenly I didn't find it as easy anymore, and I didn't feel as confident, and I didn't know which bike I needed to get anymore. And you know, or when my second child came along, getting a trailer, and was it safe, and you know, I felt all these different things about it that I hadn't felt before. So I'm really passionate about empowering people to cycle, and also just having, you know, an understanding of all the different kind of barriers that different experiences can cause for people. And I know from your vast experience that we've got on the panel, we're going to have a lot of different views to bring into that today. So it'd be great to get started, and I'll just pass to Isabel. It'd be great if you could share some of your thoughts on this.
Sure, thank you. Yes, building good cycling infrastructure is key to more people using it and more varied type of cyclists cycling, but it's by no means sufficient. So my organisation works with disabled people, and we are trying to ensure that disabled people realise, one, that they can cycle, but two, have the conditions in which to cycle. So a big part of what we do is campaign to make people who are in charge of providing for cycling, to make them aware of the barriers that disabled people experience when trying to cycle. So yes, I mean, for just as you just mentioned, with cycling with children is a very different thing to cycling as an individual, young, fit person who's very confident and just getting on with their own lives. And if you're cycling as a disabled person, you're similarly experiencing the world of cycling in a from a different perspective, basically. I mean, disability is such a wide and broad spectrum that it's difficult to generalise, but there are some real themes. So yes, infrastructure is absolutely key. We need it to be inclusive of the widths and the lengths and the weight of and the different turning circles of non-standard cycles as well as bicycles. But also disabled people might need to be starting their journeys straight on their cycles, for example, from their front door. A lot of disabled people cycle but can't walk, or not with ease, or can't walk their cycle, but they can ride miles. So we need the legislation and the understanding of people who enforce the legislation to be able to accommodate people who need to ride a little bit on footways, for example. So there's legislative and guidance and rules kinds of areas of things to change. We also need to have a general, well, that's not just for disabled people, but people who are getting into cycling, to have a general understanding of the fact that actually you're not going to have to battle with huge amounts of traffic. Or if you're a deaf cyclist, for example, that you've got enough time and space and to be able to use your visual senses, not just rely on your hearing, etc., etc. So there's a lot of other things that need to happen, not just infrastructure. But of course, many more people can cycle than cycle now.
Yeah, which is great. Yeah,
And we'll come back to more areas,
thank
no
you
doubt.
as well. Yeah. Tammy, could you share some thoughts with us as well?
Definitely championing what you have said. I guess different people have different barriers when it comes to cycling, especially from their starting point. With a lot of the work we do at My Choice and with the people we engage with through Black Riders Association, we take people from their very first thought of, I would like to get a bike. So the infrastructure may be there, but if I've never rid a bike before, I don't know where I can go to get lessons. It makes no difference. I still have no access to what is built and what is in front of me. So I guess the benefits of having the infrastructure is great, but there's a lot more that needs to be put in place in regards to signposting people to organisations or people who can point people in the right direction, give them the training, the understanding that they need, not just the physical aspects, but whether it's visual aspects of areas. I know we mentioned something before. There are certain areas people have the visual understanding. They're heavily congested by cars. Just because an announcement has been made, there's now a cycle highway. That means nothing to them because the fear is, well, there are lots of cars over there. I'm not that confident. I've seen some cycling infrastructures where you're on the cycleway and you get chucked out into the road, back onto traffic, and if I know what that area is like, maybe it might be like that, I just won't go. And if there's nothing visually for me to see, or this is where it comes to representation, if there's nobody who I feel I can identify with when seeing adverts or news about new infrastructures being built in specific areas, what would make me think I would be welcome there, or people like myself will be accepted, or it's even a place I could even go for whatever form of cycling you may want to venture into. So I guess again there are a number of things we could discuss when talking about these things, but I will pass the floor over.
Well, I mean, there's no shortage of barriers to helping people cycle, and some of them are physical, and the infrastructure is hugely important. And part of the infrastructure problem is the knowledge of the infrastructure. So I don't live in London. I cycled here today. I turned up and said, I've just been that most terrible route. And Isabel and Tammy both immediately went, oh, you shouldn't go that way. But, you know, as an outsider, what's the first thing I do? I use an app. I use a common mapping app, and it took me a terrible way through the middle of the city of London. If we've got nice infrastructure, but it relies on local knowledge, that's going to be a problem. And in particular, one of the reasons that's going to be a massive problem is a person's first impressions, and Temi just touched on this. A person's first impressions are going to completely determine whether they come back and have another go or not. I mean, I remember I saw some data years ago from the Department for Transport which suggested something like 2/3 of people had tried cycling fairly recently, and actually a similar number had tried public transport and then stopped. And so, we can build these new things. We've got a shiny new lane here, but if that first experience is, as you say, you get spat out into a dual carriageway or something like that, then it's not going to work. And it makes me think, how can we address that? Because let's just take London, never mind the whole country, let's just take London. It's a big place, and it's lots of different boroughs and lots of different councils and lots of different mayors even. How do we get that to join up? And the only thing I can think of that potentially makes that work is not to work on this street, this lane, this thing, but to work more on a vision. To say the vision for this city or this borough or whatever is active transport is first. That anyone who's walking or cycling, this town is for them, and everyone who's driving is a guest. And if you start with that vision, maybe even literally written on a board as you come in, you're driving, you're a guest, then other things like bits of infrastructure that don't quite join up, like the need to be on a footpath for a few metres, those things might take care of themselves a bit more if everyone's within that overarching vision of where we want to get to.
Thanks, Ian. And there's been quite a lot of themes around sort of quality of infrastructure that you've mentioned as well. So Isabel, you mentioned about different qualities of infrastructure for disabled people, riders, and whether it joins up and how it looks and whether it's welcoming, which I think are really important points. But then again, is that enough? If that was all perfect, would that be enough to get everybody cycling?
So maybe I can bring a new angle now as well, which is particular but not restricted to disabled people, but people who ride non-standard cycles, so tricycles, hand cycles, but also cargo cyclists, therefore parents and traders who ride on a cargo cycle. There is a huge area of barrier, which is the cost of these. Well, first the information, so you didn't know much when you started wanting to cycle with your children.
Yeah.
What cycle can I use with my children? What are they? And it's the same for, or even more the case for a disabled person. Which type of cycle is going to work for me?
Yeah.
Where can I try one?
Yeah.
Can I afford it?
Yeah.
So access to cycles, and you mentioned that too. It requires information, it requires networks of people like myself, like yourself, like, people like me, whoever me is, to be able to say, I've seen somebody like me out there, oh, I might want to do that too. But if you never see somebody like yourself out there doing it, or you've, as you said about publicity around cycling, marketing, etc., if it's always marketing to me a vision of cycling which is nothing to do with me,
Yeah.
I'm hardly ever going to be thinking, oh, well, I want to do that. Why would I want to do that? It's all for whatever. Young, white, very fit, sporty looking people. Well, I'm a 50-something, disabled person. Is that really for me? And of course it is for me. And really I want to be doing cycling because that's going to get me from A to B. It's going to keep me fitter than I am, and I definitely aren't very fit. But cycling is actually a lot easier than even just wheeling along the pavement for me.
Okay.
Now I've realised that, I want to do more of it.
Yeah.
But it's taken me years to get to that, and I want to short-circuit that for other people.
Yeah.
So we are absolutely through, for example, Wills Wellbeing, but other organisations too, and we want mainstream cycling to be shouting from the rooftops about the fact that of course disabled people cycle, and yes, there's information, and then you can channel people who then realise they want to do it to organisations who have lots of information about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think quite often when new infrastructure is being designed, people have concerns about how it will impact disabled people, which is, rightly so. Of course, we should be thinking about how it impacts everybody. But perhaps that conversation could be more about how can this benefit disabled people.
Oh, totally. But in actual fact, that's why I'm really interested in the active active travel, walking, wheeling and cycling rather than just cycling debate, because actually the vast majority of people do not think at cycling as a day-to-day, everyday mode of transport. They think at cycling as maybe something they might aspire to one day, but actually walking, using the pavement, wheeling in my case, is the basis. If you can't get that right, cycling is a luxury in a way that people haven't got space to think about. So I think when we talk about active travel, we absolutely have to be really adamant about getting the walking and wheeling space right first and foremost, and if you make that a priority and then the cycling space, as Ian said, make cars guests. We're not banning cars, making them guests. So they're second. They're not the most important people. The most important people are people on feet, wheels, etc., who need to be safe. They're the more vulnerable road user, but also they're the more daily road user. We all have to start our journeys from our doorstep, therefore the footway.
Absolutely.
So I think when we shift the debate to saying, of course the footway is the first place that has to be accessible and safe, and then we can then get from there to the cycleway and the carriageway, we bring everybody with us. But if we're only always talking about cycling only, we're making it feel like to people who every day have to walk like they're second class. No. It starts with them. It starts for all of us.
Range. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you mentioned people kind of feeling like the messaging was speaking to them. I'm interested to dig into that a bit more. Perhaps Temi and Ian as well. How can we get that message out to people, or get people to actually feel like something is for them?
Yep.
Yeah.
For me, I feel it's relatively easy. We, as Ian said, take London for example. We live in one of, if not the most diverse city in the world. Representation matters. Again, going back to what Ian said, rather than looking at creating an infrastructure where we say what's happening in Hackney and what's happening in Bethnal Green or Tower Hamlets, why not make a general observation of what's happening in London, in areas, in boroughs where the people who we want to engage have voices. Why not listen to them? There are people who use bikes as a way to get to work, as a way to exercise, as a way to just burn off steam, as a way to get from A to B, as their daily jobs, as a way of life for some people. Showcase that. That way you no matter where you are, whether the city office worker who commutes on a Brompton or whatever bike he chooses, because that's the sort of bike they enjoy. It just diversifies the conversation to showcase cycling is just that. It's a way to get from A to B, and anybody that has an interest is welcome. And the information, if it is there, is available for you to start that journey, and the network of people who are willing to give you tips, advice, knowledge, or signpost you to people who can if they can't, is also available. It goes full circle. Now, whether I am a young kid or an adult who for the first time sees an advert, and it doesn't matter where I am, I can identify. Whether it's the child watching that advert, mum, this resonates with me. If the mum sees the advert, they also see someone who resonates with them. Okay, now it becomes, we could do something on bikes as a family. If there are parks, for example, out there that parents were aware you could come to cycle on the weekend, and there are schemes that are available, hire a bike if you can't afford a bike for you and the family. It makes it easier. It makes it more welcoming, and it just does the job that people are thinking, how do we get your everyday person on bikes? And sometimes people do too much when you can simplify it so easily. To get the impact we
so
want.
it's kind of messaging, sort of public messaging, and also I was interested in, like, You know, we were talking about how do people start to gain an experience if they haven't experienced it before, and what do we need to do in our communities, or how do we like take that experience to people?
It feels like in some ways the big challenge is actually the first step. So with my psychologist hat on, one thing we know really clearly from loads of research is that people copy each other. We imitate unconsciously what we see other people do. And if we could get, you know, a much higher proportion of people walking and wheeling, so it was visible, and every time you went out of your house you saw more people doing it, we're going to imitate. So it's how the question becomes how we get that first jump so that we no longer have to worry about representation. It's just happening naturally, because if everybody's doing something, it's naturally representative. It's how we get there. The thing that occurs to me as well, just picking up on something Isabel said earlier, it's when you zoom out, it's really interesting that we talk about the barriers to entry, because no one ever has that conversation about driving. And if you think about it, the barriers to entry to driving a car, you've got to go on loads of training courses, you've got to pay for that, you've got to apply for a license, you've got to find thousands of pounds for a car. No one ever talks about the barriers to that, and it's actually dramatically worse than cycling. So what is it, what's going on that we all don't notice those, and yet we're very focused on the barriers to cycling? And again, it's probably that it's just not normal. It's just not what we do, and so we fixate on the challenges.
Is it partly because, like you said, because it's not normal, that everyone sees a natural path, even though there's a lot of training and there's a lot of cost involved? People kind of understand the pathway, whereas the barrier with cycling is if you don't know anything about it or you haven't experienced it, you don't even see a pathway there.
I think that's exactly right. You know, at the moment, even though it's not objectively, driving a car feels like the path of least resistance. And in fact, in terms of moving down the street, it is, because you're given priority and everyone else has to get out of your way. But yeah, as an activity, it's the path of least resistance. Maybe we need to be preparing people more, let's say, through school. You're planting the idea from the age of 5 that when you're an adult, this is how you're going to get about, and make it feel more of a natural trajectory.
And if by that age you've been cycled around by your parents anyway, it is going to be what's expected. I mean, for disabled people, I feel it's possibly slightly different. I mean, barriers to mobility for disabled people with mobility impairment, barriers to mobility, including to driving, are huge. And having said that, cycling isn't currently included in the kind of discussions that people are having. So they may be having discussions with professionals and people around them about, I mean, plenty of people spend lots of time trying not to use a wheelchair, but actually there are wheelchair services, there is information about it. They're actually amazingly enabling, but there are limits to their usefulness for going about daily walkabouts. And there is information about getting into driving, and there is the Motability scheme. If you are lucky enough to be disabled enough to be in receipt of enough of the right benefits, then you can exchange that for a car. But you cannot currently exchange it for a cycle, and nobody's told you that actually. And I now keep saying it a lot: is that cycling is a lot easier than walking. Cycling is a lot easier than wheeling. I mean, I can wheel from here, I can cycle from Brixton to here far more easily than get the bus here. That's the reality. And also, any time I'm forced to use the footway as a wheelchair user is much harder than getting in the road, or getting on the cycle lane preferably, or getting in the road if the cars are guests and I'm quite appropriately, being let to get on with my life. So until society as a whole, and then the professionals around our lives, etc., understand and start saying, well, have you thought about cycling? It'll be really good. For me as a hand cyclist, it's the best cardiovascular exercise I do. I could be doing it every day. I need to move every day. I need to travel every day. I now actually very rarely use my car, but that's taken me years to get to this point. And information about the fact that it was available, information about where to get it, information about where to ride it and how safe it is, and it has become a lot safer to ride. All of those things also added to the fact that actually car driving has been recently made less convenient and less fast. And actually all of those things have changed my behaviour and have enabled me to cycle more and therefore be healthier. I win at the end of the day, as well as the planet, you know. But it's not part of daily conversations. It's like, oh, you're cycling, oh my God, really? kind of conversation. So we need to move that along. But the fact that it is now the safest way and the best way for me to move around and the most pleasant, I need to keep saying it so other people hear it.
Yeah, it's amazing to hear your story. Yeah, and it's definitely going to be making change for other people to see that and to hear that, which is fantastic. And linking into Ian's point about people copying other people and how change begets change. I'm still interested in, like, would that, you know, how do we make that change for everyone? Because, you know, seeing more people cycle or walk or wheel, you know, doesn't necessarily still impact everyone in the same way. And what groups, in your experiences, are less likely to respond to that change, and how can we reach those people?
I guess from where I'm coming from, and I do a lot of work specifically with marginalised kids and families, where I guess entry point is affording a bike or affording more than one bike in a family of 2 or 3 kids. It's the price range for some of these activities. It's maintaining the bikes. It's where the bikes being stored. It is the bike sessions that may be put on in that area accessible for the families to even get there to participate.
I think the social aspect is hugely important. The seeing, just cycling's just a means to an end. It's not important in itself. But if we can bring people together through the means of cycling. So, I mean, I've through the lockdown, I ended up starting I called it in the end Sunday Cycling Adventures. But you know, there was nothing much going on. We're all locked down, and but we could go out and exercise. So I started, but I'm not. My motivator is being with people. So I don't go out cycling on my own. I didn't cycle the whole of the first lockdown, but I found that another friend was interested in cycling, but she can't route map. You know, she can't plan a route to save her life. I'm quite interested in cycling, and I hear about routes, etc. Low traffic neighbourhoods, they're controversial, etc. Let's go check them out. So I was keen to go out and check them out. She was keen to go and do more cycling, but she didn't know where else to go than her usual route. So we started off together, and then we, you know, just said to other people, do you want to come on a Sunday, blah blah. And actually, just then it just became, we'll just go off and find a new park to check out, check out the seasons going by, the wildlife, the flora, the whatever. Cycling's just the way we get there. It doesn't, you know, but we are a little social group, and in the meantime, I'm finding lots of new routes and lots of interesting places to get to, and it's really done me a load of good in terms of my confidence, and similarly to other women I know who are not disabled women particularly, but they've just been confident to go because I know where we're going, kind of thing. And so just generally I know where we're going, more or less. And now the traffic is rebuilt because it's post-lockdown, and also our lives have picked up and we've got less time, but we still do it occasionally. And it's that social aspect that got us, you know, cycling more. At Wheels for Wellbeing, we're doing more rides as well, rather than doing all of our sessions at venues away from traffic, which are key to more disabled people cycling, getting into cycling, starting out. But we're now also doing rides out of the sessions to a different place, so it takes away the sameness of it, but also it's then a group of people who are together, like really excited to become more confident and fitter, etc., but also just looking forward to seeing each other. And I mean, they don't all have to come every time, but so I think creating social opportunities around a means to an end of getting fitter or becoming more confident or finding a new place and a new way to get there, the social aspect to me is a crucial one.
Yeah,
Be
I love that, and
surprised.
how people.
Sorry.
How people are empowered by a group as well. Tell me, go.
I was just going to say, you'd be surprised at how many people you encourage when they see you out. They may not come up to you, but just seeing what you're doing, if they are in similar positions or circumstances, whether you're disabled or not, just seeing
Yep.
it is the spot that looks cool, that looks fun. There's nothing like that going on around here. You know what? I may start it for some, whereas others, let me find out who you are, because I would love to come on one of your rides or just be involved in any way, shape or form. Some people who they can't even ride, but they just love the smiles on your faces or the atmosphere of your group or the aura, and however they can help is the next thing they say. Even if I don't ride or I'm not a keen cyclist, but I would love to just help you promote, and it's just amazing. So just championing what you said.
Yeah. And it does make a difference when you do something with people that have a similar experience to you or look similar to you. In terms of your research, have you got anything on like the impact of that? Or?
Well, I mean, this really resonates, this idea of, it's the classic representation thing. You've got to see it to be it, isn't it? And the thing that worries me a bit is, like, people like Temi and Isabel, it's amazing that you are being role models like this, but there's also a sense in which it's unfair that pressure is put on you to have to do it, because, it's an extra step that is being placed on you that other people are not doing. So, amazing that you are, but why should you have to, is one way of looking at it. Maybe part of the problem, I'm not going to be able to answer the question entirely, but maybe part of the thing is, and I'm just going to pick up on something Isabel said a minute ago, the cycling isn't a means to an end. And I wonder if part of the issue with this is, sometimes it is. I've done some fairly hardcore sports riding where I just go out and I ride really hard, and it is a means to an end, that's what I'm doing. But 95% of cycling isn't that. It's people going to the shops or going to work or hanging out with their friends or all the things that you've talked about. Maybe part of the problem is this identity thing, isn't it? That when you say, oh, let's cycle, people picture me on that bike, middle-aged white guy, let's face it, middle-aged white guy in Lycra, and think, well, that's not me. That doesn't ring any bells. But that image has got so attached to the machine that it potentially acts as a huge barrier, because we conflate the machine, which can be used for lots of different things. We fixate on this one use of it and forget about all the other uses.
I totally agree. I mean, we at Wheels Wellbeing try and talk about cycling as little as we can. I mean, people come and cycle at our sessions, and in their heads, then they, you might say, "Oh, did you enjoy cycling?" "Oh, I don't cycle, dear." That's like, what do you mean? Yeah. And what they've done isn't cycling. What they've done is exercise, or is having fun, or is coming to spend a good time with their friends or with their family, whatever. It's something else altogether, compared to what you've just described, which is what people have in their mind. If they say cycling, they say something which is not to do with them. They say something but we can change. We have to change that. Absolutely have to change that. So we don't talk about bicycles, for example. We talk about cycles. To make the point, well, because a bicycle is one type of cycle,
right,
and we mustn't have that in our heads as cycling is bicycling. Otherwise, everybody who cannot use a bicycle assumes they cannot cycle, which couldn't be further from the truth. But yes, we have to somehow find a different lingo to talk about this thing, which is about moving actively, faster than you can on your feet or just on your wheel, in your wheelchair, and actually, which is far more fun.
But at the risk of sounding like a stuck record as well, we don't do this when it comes to driving. When you see me riding fast on a road bike, you should be comparing that to Formula One, but we don't do that. If you see, I've got a friend who's a really serious mountain biker, that should be the equivalent of a rally driver. But we're able to see those distinctions incredibly clearly when it comes to cars, We don't think the mountain bike, so the rally driver is the same as the person driving to the supermarket. But as soon as it's a bicycle, because it's a bit of an outsider thing, a cycle, because it's a bit of an outsider thing, we don't apply the same judgment.
I was thinking exactly that this morning as I was driving today, because I was going to drive here because of the ridiculous weather, and I'm a fair weather cyclist. But I was seeing actually a really varied set of riders actually in front of me, because at that time it was quite lovely weather, and there was a lot of people, different shapes and sizes and colours and types of cycles. It was brilliant. And then one of those whizzy cyclists went by, and I was having this conversation in my head saying, well, actually things are starting to change. And I know that a few months, not even years ago, people who are the whizzy cyclists were saying, whoa, these slow cyclists on our cycle lanes, they're in the way. And actually now I'm seeing very clearly that whizzy cyclist, if they want to beat their Strava scores or whatever they're doing, do it on the road. Chase the cars. That's where you're meant to be. Leave the cycling infrastructure, the mobility infrastructure, I call it, which has been there created for the non-whizzes. You've been doing it on the road all this time. You don't need protected infrastructure if you want to ride in that way. If you want to ride on the protected infrastructure, ride with everyone else. Like you walk on the pavement, you walk with everyone else. And it shouldn't be a place where people should feel entitled to be Formula 1 riding. As it is not about a race. It's about getting from A to B together. We're all part of it. And just like no car would be accepted suddenly, going 0 to 60 in traffic and sort of going past everybody else, shooing people out of the way. Why are we expecting that to happen in the cycling world?
So many really interesting points from all of you, and it'd be really great to get your final thoughts just before we finish.
We could, if we want to, get to a position in just a few years where active transport is the default in urban areas. But we've got to be bold. We've got to make that easy, and we've also got to make what we're currently doing harder. And that's going to take some courage from policymakers.
Thanks, Ian. Temi?
I hope with conversations like these and the people leading them, in a few more years, we will see the change we are tirelessly trying to see fulfilled in London for cycling, walking and accessible transport for all.
Thanks, Temi. Isabel?
So walking, wheeling and cycling are the best way to move, and we want everybody to do that. And I think we need to stop talking just about transport. We need to broaden it. Health is the next big area for us to talk about in this debate, and then we'll bring everybody along.
Yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, it's such an important subject, and it's something that we're really passionate about at Sustrans, and doing a lot of work in this area, and it's great to hear about all the work that you're all doing in this area as well. And I hope we are going to see huge changes in the future, and we're working towards that. So looking forward to that, and thanks so much for coming to talk to us today.